She was called the Black Queen, a woman whose name still sends shivers down the spines of historians. Catherine de Medici, the Italian noblewoman who became one of the most powerful and controversial figures in 16th century France, wielded influence with a shadowy brilliance that few could rival. But behind the opulent tapestries of the French court, whispers of poison, betrayal, and a secret network of female spies swirled around her like smoke. What if everything you've heard about her is only half the story? Picture this: an elite group of women, handpicked by Catherine herself, moving silently through the halls of power. They were known as the Flying Squadron, and their mission was simple: gather secrets, manipulate alliances, and ensure the Medici grip on France never loosened. These weren't just spies, they were weapons disguised in silk and perfume. Yet this was only one thread in the intricate tapestry of Catherine's life. From her tumultuous rise as a foreign bride to her ruthless reign as Queen Mother, every step she took was calculated, every smile a potential trap. Today, we're peeling back the layers of history to uncover 25 enigmatic details about Catherine de Medici, facts that reveal her not just as a queen, but as a master strategist, a patron of the arts, and perhaps even an occult dabbler. Did she really keep a cabinet of poisons? Was she behind some of the most infamous assassinations of her time? And what drove her to orchestrate one of history's bloodiest massacres? The answers lie hidden in the shadows, waiting to be brought into the light. This isn't just a story of power, it's a journey into the mind of a woman who shaped an empire while remaining one of history's most misunderstood figures. So, are you ready to step into her world? Catherine de Medici's name is forever tangled with the art of poison, a shadowy legacy that paints her as the sinister queen who ruled France from behind a vial of venom. The whispers began the moment she arrived from Italy, a land the French already distrusted for its rumored mastery of lethal concoctions. At the heart of the legend lies the so-called Book of Poisons, a mysterious manuscript said to contain recipes for untraceable toxins, passed down through Catherine's Medici ancestors. Courtiers swore she kept it locked away, consulting its pages to eliminate rivals, but here's the twist. No physical evidence of this book has ever been found. Historians are divided. Some argue it was pure propaganda, a smear campaign against a powerful foreign woman, while others suggest it might have been a metaphorical weapon, a symbol of her psychological grip on the court. Consider the infamous case of Jeanne d'Albret, the Protestant Queen of Navarre, who died suddenly after wearing a pair of perfumed gloves gifted by Catherine. The timing was suspicious and the rumors exploded, but modern forensic analysis suggests Jeanne likely succumbed to natural causes. Yet, in an era where illness and intrigue blurred together, perception was everything. Catherine understood this better than anyone. She didn't need to actually poison someone. The fear that she could was often enough. The irony: Catherine herself lived in terror of being poisoned, employing food tasters and obsessively testing her meals. This wasn't just paranoia, it was survival in a world where a single dinner could be your last. So, was she a ruthless poisoner or simply a victim of her own reputation? The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the murky middle. What's undeniable is how these myths shaped her rule, turning her into both a puppet master and a scapegoat, feared even when she stood innocent. To separate fact from fiction, we must turn to the paper trail Catherine left behind, or more accurately, the lack of one. Diplomatic letters from her reign reveal a ruler far more preoccupied with political alliances than poison recipes. In one telling exchange with the Spanish ambassador, she furiously denies accusations of foul play, writing that such slanders were spread by enemies seeking to weaken her influence. Even the Vatican's archives, which meticulously documented Medici affairs, contain no references to poison manuals, only endless inventories of art commissions and marriage negotiations. Then there's the chilling account of the Duc d'Anjou's trial decades after Catherine's death, where a former courtier claimed under torture to have seen her administer a lethal powder. But here's the catch: the testimony was extracted after weeks of starvation and was immediately contradicted by other witnesses. Modern scholars liken it to the Salem witch trials, coerced confessions designed to confirm pre-existing fears. Yet the shadows persist. In the margins of a royal physician's journal from 1562, there's a cryptic note about the Italian method for treating lingering afflictions. Was this a veiled reference to poison or merely a medical technique? The ambiguity itself speaks volumes about Catherine's world, where rumor could shape reality. What emerges isn't evidence of a serial poisoner, but something far more revealing: a portrait of how power breeds myth and how a woman ruling in a man's world became the perfect vessel for every dark fantasy her enemies could conjure. Long before Nostradamus became a household name, his cryptic verses held Catherine de Medici in a grip of fascination. The famed seer first entered her orbit in 1556, summoned to the French court after word spread of his eerily accurate predictions. For a queen already steeped in the occult traditions of Renaissance Florence, where astrology was as vital as diplomacy, his arrival wasn't mere curiosity. It was destiny knocking. Their relationship went far beyond the typical patron and mystic dynamic. Catherine didn't just request horoscopes, she demanded them, particularly for her fragile sons, whose futures were her obsession. Nostradamus reportedly gazed into the heavens and saw devastation. In one chilling quatrain, he wrote of young lions who would fall before the stronger, a line many later interpreted as foreseeing the early deaths of her 3 sons destined to rule France. The prophecy seemed to unfold with horrifying precision. Francis II died at 16, Charles IX at 23, and Henry III at 37, each reign shorter and more tragic than the last. But here's what most retellings miss: Catherine wasn't passively awaiting fate. She weaponized these predictions. When Nostradamus warned of a nobleman's betrayal, she purged her court. When he hinted at Protestant uprisings, she tightened surveillance. His words became the bedrock of her paranoia, justifying some of her most ruthless moves, like the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. Yet ironically, the very prophecies meant to secure her family's power may have accelerated their downfall. By fixating on Nostradamus' visions, Catherine alienated allies who saw her reliance on mysticism as weakness, not wisdom. The darkest twist: scholars now suspect Nostradamus tailored his quatrains to flatter her fears. His infamous young lions line, for instance, only gained its association with her sons decades later, retroactively fitted to events by interpreters. Whether manipulator or genuine visionary, his influence on Catherine reveals a haunting truth. Sometimes the most dangerous prophecies are the ones we choose to believe. Catherine's court wasn't just a seat of political power, it was a sanctuary for the esoteric, a place where the boundaries between science and sorcery blurred. While Nostradamus remains the most famous of her mystical advisors, he was far from alone. The queen surrounded herself with a veritable army of astrologers, alchemists, and cunning women, each playing a distinct role in her intricate web of influence. Take Cosimo Ruggeri, the Florentine astrologer who claimed to communicate with spirits through a magic mirror. Catherine reportedly consulted him before every major decision, from marriage alliances to military campaigns. His predictions were so valued that when he once warned of an assassination attempt, she doubled her guards and altered her routes for months only for the threat to never materialize. Then there were the alchemists like the enigmatic Bragadin, who promised not just gold from base metals but elixirs to prolong life. In an age where illness could strike down kings overnight, Catherine's obsession with longevity wasn't mere superstition, it was strategy. She funded laboratories in the Louvre's hidden chambers, where furnace smoke mingled with the scent of rare herbs. Yet for all their arcane knowledge, these alchemists failed to spare her children from early graves. Some historians argue their true value lay not in magic but in espionage. alchemical circles were international networks, perfect for gathering intelligence under the guise of scholarly exchange. But the most intriguing figures were the women seers like Madame de Thillery, a blind prophetess whose visions Catherine allegedly trusted above all others. These women moved through the court unnoticed, their whispers shaping policies and poisoning reputations. When the queen needed to discredit a rival, a well-placed prophecy about betrayal or ill fortune could do the work of an army. The irony, many of these mystics were likely charlatans, feeding Catherine's fears to line their own pockets. Yet in a world where perception dictated power, their illusions became her reality. What's often overlooked is how Catherine weaponized these occult connections against her enemies. When Protestant leaders mocked her reliance on astrologers, she leaked false prophecies predicting their downfall, a psychological warfare tactic that sowed discord in their ranks. Even her patronage of the arts had an occult edge. The grotesque imagery in her tapestries and masks, filled with celestial symbols and ominous portents, served as silent reminders of her alleged divine insight. The true genius of Catherine's occult network wasn't magic, it was theater. By crafting an aura of supernatural authority, she compensated for her precarious position as a foreign queen in a fracturing kingdom. Every horoscope, every elixir, every whispered prophecy reinforced the idea that she alone could navigate the unseen forces shaping France's destiny. Whether she truly believed in these arts or simply understood their power over the human mind, one thing is clear. In the shadowy realm where power and mysticism intertwined, Catherine de Medici was always 3 steps ahead. Amid the grandeur of the French court, a mother's private nightmare unfolded in the summer of 1566. While Catherine de Medici is often remembered for her political machinations, few speak of the plague that stole 2 of her children, 14-year-old Jean and 7-year-old Louis. The outbreak tore through their chateau in Blois with merciless speed, leaving no time for elaborate medical interventions or desperate prayers. Within days, the royal nursery became a morgue. Contemporary accounts describe Catherine collapsing beside their small coffins, her wails echoing through the stone corridors. But this wasn't just personal tragedy, it was a turning point that would reshape her reign. Unlike the deaths of her older sons, which played out on the public stage, these losses were shrouded in silence. The court scarcely acknowledged the children's passing, as if their youth made their lives less consequential. Yet the impact on Catherine was profound. She commissioned hauntingly intimate portraits of Jean and Louis, their faces frozen in innocence, and kept them in her private chambers. Visitors reported catching her murmuring to these images late at night, a detail that exposes the raw humanity beneath her iron reputation. Paranoia, already a thread in her psyche, tightened its grip. Witnessing how quickly disease could breach even royal defenses, Catherine became obsessed with contagion. She ordered the windows of her palaces lined with vinegar-soaked cloths, believing it purified the air. Her infamous network of spies expanded to include physicians reporting on outbreaks across Europe, and she banned travelers from plague-stricken regions with unprecedented severity. Some historians argue this trauma directly influenced her later draconian measures against Protestants, whom she increasingly associated with disorder and divine punishment. The cruelest irony, the plague had no regard for power. While Catherine's political enemies whispered that her children's deaths were God's judgment, she secretly funded the most advanced medical research of the era, including early experiments with quarantine protocols. In her private letters to the Venetian ambassador, a rare glimpse behind the mask, she confessed fears that her remaining sons would share Jean and Louis' fate. That terror, more than any prophecy or poison, may explain her increasingly desperate grasp on control. These forgotten children, buried without fanfare, became ghosts that haunted every decision of her twilight years, their absence a gaping wound beneath the jewels and velvet. Beneath the glittering facade of palace balls and whispered diplomacy, Catherine de Medici orchestrated a silent war, one fought not with swords, but with stolen glances and strategically loosened corsets. The so-called Flying Squadron, a coterie of stunning women handpicked for their beauty and cunning, became her most controversial weapon. Historical accounts describe them gliding through court like shadows in silk, their laughter masking lethal agendas. But were these women truly a formal spy network, or just another layer of myth woven around Catherine's reign? The evidence lies scattered like breadcrumbs in forgotten letters. Venetian ambassador Giovanni Michiel wrote of doves who nest in the ears of powerful men, while Spanish envoys grumbled about Italian women who trade kisses for confidences. Most damning is a dispatch from 1572, where a Huguenot diplomat warns his allies to avoid private conversations with certain ladies-in-waiting, noting their unnatural curiosity about troop movements. Yet no official roster of the squadron survives, only feverish rumors painting them as everything from patriotic heroines to high-class honey traps. Take Charlotte Dussault, the squadron's alleged star operative. Contemporary chroniclers describe her as possessing lips that spilled secrets as easily as they drank wine. She reportedly seduced both Protestant leader Henry of Navarre and his rival the Duc d'Anjou simultaneously, keeping each ignorant of the other's pillow talk. But modern historians caution against simplistic interpretations. Letters between Catherine and Charlotte reveal a more nuanced relationship, one where favors and promotions flowed not just for gathered intelligence, but for stabilizing fragile alliances through carefully managed affairs. The squadron's true power may have been psychological. By letting courtiers believe every beautiful woman might be Catherine's agent, the Queen created an atmosphere of paranoia where even loyal nobles policed their own tongues. This blurring of seduction and surveillance wasn't unique to France. The Ottoman sultans and Italian city-states employed similar tactics, but Catherine refined it into an art form. What's often overlooked is how these women leveraged their roles. While some undoubtedly acted under direct orders, others used their position to advance personal agendas, feeding Catherine selective truths to eliminate rivals. The Duc de Guise's abrupt fall from favor in 1576 coincides suspiciously with his mistress's sudden access to the Queen's inner circle. Whether pawns or players, the Flying Squadron epitomized Renaissance espionage, a world where every silk gown could hide daggers of information, and the most dangerous battles were fought between tangled sheets. Along the serene banks of the river Cher, behind the graceful arches of the Château de Chenonceau, lay Catherine de Medici's most private sanctuary, the Jardin de la Reine. This wasn't just any royal garden, it was a lush, walled paradise brimming with flora so rare, many had never been seen in France before. Imagine velvet petalled roses from Persia, twisting mandrake roots from the Levant, and even rumors of night-blooming flowers whispered to have been cultivated for their medicinal properties. But the true mystery lay in the statues that dotted the pathways, not the usual nymphs or saints, but figures from ancient myth with deliberate, unsettling symbolism. A grinning Pan perched near a secluded bench, his flute forever silent. A veiled Hecate stood watch over a hidden grotto, her stone eyes seeming to follow visitors. The garden's design was no accident. Catherine, ever the strategist, used its beauty as both shield and signal. The labyrinthine hedges, trimmed to create perfectly private alcoves, were ideal for conversations meant to stay unheard. Spanish ambassadors wrote of being led there for talks, only to find themselves suddenly alone with the Queen beneath a bower of poisonous belladonna, a plant she pointedly identified as she discussed the perils of betrayal. Meanwhile, Protestant nobles who visited often remarked on the garden's eerie stillness, as if even the birds knew not to repeat what they overheard. Recent excavations have added fuel to the legends. Buried beneath a statue of Artemis, archaeologists found a small lead box containing coded notes, likely meeting records, and a lock of hair wrapped in silk. Was this a lover's token, a keepsake from a lost child, or something more sinister? The garden's most infamous feature, a moon dial said to predict the hour of a person's death, turned out to be real. But here's the twist: its predictions weren't celestial. Court records show servants were ordered to adjust its shadow based on which noble had fallen from favor, turning superstition into psychological terror. What makes the Jardin de la Réunion truly remarkable isn't just its secrets, but its duality. By day, a showcase of Renaissance botany where Catherine hosted lavish parties under floral canopies. By night, according to kitchen staff diaries, a place where shadowy figures slipped through side gates to confer with Ruggery the astrologer, his cloak brushed with the same jasmine that grew by the garden's secret door. This wasn't mere landscaping, it was theater, a stage where Catherine controlled every sightline and every whisper. Even now, 5 centuries later, the garden's lingering aura asks us, were the plants meant to heal, to intoxicate, or to remind visitors that beauty itself could be a weapon? The seeds of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre were planted a decade earlier in the quiet town of Wassy, where a single act of brutality revealed just how thin the veneer of religious tolerance really was. In March 1562, a group of Huguenots gathered in a barn to worship, a direct violation of recent edicts restricting Protestant services. What happened next would set a terrible precedent. The Duc de Guise's men stormed in, slaughtering over 60 unarmed worshippers. The streets ran red, not with the blood of soldiers, but of craftsmen, women, and even children. Catherine's response, a calculated silence that spoke volumes. While she publicly condemned the violence, court records show she secretly rewarded Guise with lands and titles within weeks. This wasn't mere political pragmatism, it was a blueprint. By allowing Catholic hardliners to act with impunity, Catherine tested the waters, gauging how far she could push before France fractured. The Huguenots, understandably enraged, took up arms, sparking the first of 8 devastating wars of religion. But here's what most histories overlook. Catherine's personal correspondence reveals she saw Wassy not as a tragedy, but as a lesson. In a chilling letter to her ambassador in Rome, she wrote that sometimes a small fire prevents a greater conflagration, a stark admission that she believed controlled violence could maintain the balance of power. Fast forward to August 1572, and the echoes of Wassy reverberated through Paris's cobbled streets. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, where thousands of Protestants were butchered, didn't erupt from nowhere. It was the horrific culmination of a strategy Catherine had refined over years, using targeted bloodshed as a political tool. Just as at Wassy, the killing began with a narrow focus, the assassination of Admiral Coligny, a Huguenot leader, then spiraled into chaos when Catholic mobs, emboldened by a decade of unchecked violence, turned on their neighbors. The key difference: scale and intent. Where Wassy was localized brutality, St. Bartholomew's was a coordinated campaign. Surviving orders show Catherine's network of couriers racing across Paris that night, delivering identical instructions to city gates: lock them tight, trapping victims inside. The same woman who once pleaded for peace now orchestrated slaughter, proving how deeply those early lessons had taken root. Yet even in this darkness there's grim nuance. Diaries from her inner circle suggest she genuinely believed this massacre would be the last, that one final horrific blow might end the wars forever. Instead, it became her defining legacy, a dark mirror reflecting how the unchecked violence she allowed at Wassy had grown into something even she couldn't control. Among Catherine de Medici's most guarded secrets were the cipher letters, carefully encoded messages that traveled between her and Europe's most powerful rulers, each one a masterpiece of Renaissance espionage. These weren't just simple substitutions where one letter replaced another. Her team of cryptographers devised layered systems so complex that even today, scholars struggle to crack them fully. One particular cipher, rediscovered in the Vatican archives in 1989, used a combination of numerical codes, symbolic flourishes, and even musical notation to disguise sensitive negotiations about troop movements and royal marriages. A single page might reference a popular love song in the margins but sung backward. The lyrics revealed coordinates for a secret meeting. The sheer scale of her cryptographic network exposes how deeply Catherine understood information as power. When her daughter Marguerite was betrothed to Henry of Navarre, a Protestant leader, Catherine didn't just rely on discreet messengers. She had at least 3 separate cipher systems rotating monthly, with keys changed abruptly if a courier was delayed. Ambassadors groaned about the complexity. The Spanish envoy once complained in his diary about receiving a letter where every 3rd word was written in Greek, every 7th in Hebrew, and the rest in numbers that changed meaning based on the day's saint. What makes these letters especially revealing are the mistakes, the moments when emotion broke through the calculated facade. In 1574, after her son Charles IX's mental health began deteriorating, a hastily encrypted note to her ambassador in Florence contained an uncoded plea: "Pray for us, for we are losing him to phantoms." The original was swiftly destroyed, but a scribe's accidental copy survived, offering a rare glimpse of the woman behind the ciphers. Perhaps the most chilling discovery came from a Venetian codebreaker's journal. He described intercepting a letter from Catherine that appeared to discuss fabric shipments until he noticed the thread counts corresponded to dates, and the color names were coded references to assassination targets. The letter vanished before he could fully decode it, but his notes confirm what Catherine's enemies feared. Her words were weapons, and every syllable was armed. Yet for all their sophistication, these ciphers couldn't mask the paradox of her reign. The same woman who obsessed over securing her correspondence often deliberately let certain letters be intercepted, feeding false intelligence to mislead foes. In one brilliant gambit, she allowed a poorly encrypted message to fall into Protestant hands, detailing a non-existent Catholic plot, a ruse that sparked infighting among Huguenot leaders for months. The true legacy of Catherine's cipher letters lies not just in their technical genius, but in what they reveal about Renaissance statecraft. In an era without secure borders or digital firewalls, information was both currency and vulnerability. Her ability to weaponize language to hide truths in plain sight while exposing her enemies' secrets proved just as vital as any army. And though many of her codes remain unsolved, they all whisper the same lesson. In the game of power, the most dangerous moves are often the ones no one sees coming. The moment King Henry II's life slipped away in a Parisian chamber, his queen made a choice that would echo through history. Catherine de Medici never wore color again. For the remaining 30 years of her life, her wardrobe became a study in darkness. Gowns of deepest ebony, veils like midnight mist, even her jewels shifted to jet and onyx. Onlookers whispered it was the ultimate gesture of widow's grief, but those who knew Catherine understood there was always more beneath the surface. Consider the timing. Henry's fatal jousting accident in 1559 didn't just rob France of its king, it stripped Catherine of her political relevance overnight. As queen consort, she'd wielded influence carefully, but now her power hung by a thread. That first court appearance in head-to-toe black wasn't just mourning attire, it was armor. In Renaissance Europe, where sumptuary laws dictated who could wear what, Catherine transformed her grief into a statement. By appropriating the austere palette typically reserved for high-ranking widows, she crafted an image of unassailable dignity, making it impossible for rivals to push her into the background. Then there's the occult dimension. Venetian ambassadors noted with unease how Catherine's blacks deepened over time, taking on an almost unnatural sheen. Rumors spread that her dyes contained crushed lapis lazuli or ground magnetite materials alchemists associated with summoning spirits. The most persistent legend claims her favorite cloak was lined with embroidered zodiac signs, hidden symbols glowing faintly in candlelight. Whether true or not, the effect was undeniable. When Catherine entered a room swathed in those fathomless fabrics, she didn't just command attention. she invoked an aura of otherworldly authority. But the masterstroke lay in her manipulation of light itself. Contemporary portraits reveal how she positioned herself near windows or candelabras, allowing her dark silks to absorb illumination while her pale face floated eerily above. Art historians call this the Medici effect, a deliberate contrast making her expressions unreadable while drawing every eye. Even her mourning veils served dual purposes. They hid her aging features from a court obsessed with youth, while forcing diplomats to lean closer to catch her whispered words. The ultimate proof of this sartorial strategy, imitation. Within a decade, black became the unofficial uniform of power brokers across Europe. From Elizabeth Tudor's sable years to Philip II's grim Madrid court, rulers grasped what Catherine had demonstrated, that in politics as in alchemy, darkness could be distilled into control. Yet none matched her chilling consistency. While others eventually returned to color, she remained a shadow until her dying breath, leaving behind a legacy woven not just in silk threads, but in the unspoken language of power. When Catherine de Medici's Florentine chefs arrived in France, they carried more than just recipes, they brought scandal. The Queen's Italian culinary entourage introduced exotic ingredients like artichokes, spinach, and even fork etiquette to the French court, but their unfamiliar techniques stirred dark suspicions. Noblemen recoiled from artichokes, convinced the thorny vegetable masked lethal substances, while rich sauces were whispered to conceal the bitter tang of arsenic. One terrified diner reportedly stabbed his plate with a dagger, demanding his food be tasted by a servant first. The hysteria wasn't entirely baseless. Catherine's head chef, a sharp-eyed Florentine named Pantanelli, had direct ties to the Medici court pharmacy, an institution famed for its medicinal tonics and, some claimed, discreet poisons. When several rival nobles fell violently ill after banquets, physicians noted their symptoms matched known Italian toxins. Yet the real smoking gun emerged in a 1578 inventory. Pantanelli's kitchen stocked excessive amounts of sapper di noce moscata, a spice blend containing nutmeg, which in large doses causes hallucinations and heart failure. Was this culinary experimentation or something more sinister? Ironically, these poisonous innovations revolutionized French cuisine. The same artichokes once feared became Catherine's signature diplomatic tool. She served them at peace talks, forcing Protestant leaders to either reject hospitality or overcome their paranoia. Her chef's most dangerous creation wasn't toxic but social. By making cutlery fashionable, they eliminated the shared trenches where poison could easily be slipped. Even the scandal itself served her purposes. As one ambassador noted, men who fear their dinner speak more carelessly at it. Modern analysis reveals a clever psychological ploy. The kitchen inventories show Catherine deliberately imported obscure ingredients like mandrake root, known for both culinary and lethal uses, but in quantities too small for poisoning. The effect was pure theater, keeping enemies unsettled while her true spies worked elsewhere. What began as xenophobia against Italian cooking became one of history's most delicious ironies. The woman accused of poisoning France actually gave it gourmet culture, proving even her scandals could have exquisite taste. The urn was supposed to be eternal, a golden reliquary holding Henry II's embalmed heart, placed with solemn ceremony in the Abbey of Saint Denis beside generations of French kings. Yet when workers inspected the royal crypt in 1793, the heart was gone. No shattered glass, no signs of forced entry, just an empty space where the most intimate relic of Catherine de Medici's husband once rested. The disappearance sparked whispers that stretched back centuries. Had the Black Queen herself orchestrated its theft? Theories abound, each more tantalizing than the last. Some point to the Abbey's records from 1565, 6 years after Henry's death, noting a mysterious nighttime visit by Catherine's personal chaplain. The entry simply states he came to tend to the king's memory, but later marginalia in a monk's diary describes strange sounds near the crypt, the clink of metal, the scrape of stone. What lends credence to these whispers is Catherine's well-documented obsession with relics. She routinely carried fragments of saints' bones in lockets, believing they offered protection. If she viewed Henry's heart not just as a token of love but as a spiritual talisman, stealing it back becomes chillingly plausible. Then there's the alchemical angle. Henry died from a splintered jousting lance through the eye, a wound symbolically linked to the heart in Renaissance occult traditions. Certain grimoires of the era claimed a monarch's embalmed heart, if treated with specific herbs and planetary alignments, could grant influence over the realm's destiny. Catherine's network of astrologers included experts in such rituals, and her private letters reference the sovereign's vital essence multiple times after Henry's death. Was she attempting to harness his lingering authority from beyond the grave? The most haunting clue comes from an inventory of Catherine's belongings after her own death. Listed between silver crucifixes and Florentine tapestries was a crystal vessel of unusual shape, stored in her bedchamber. The item vanished before it could be catalogued, but a servant's memoir describes the Queen often holding it while murmuring prayers in Italian. No one can prove it contained Henry's heart, yet the timing is uncanny. The last recorded sighting of the relic in St. Denis coincides with Catherine's final years, when her grip on power was slipping and she may have sought supernatural aid. Modern forensic analysis offers a sobering counterpoint. The urn's description matches countless others looted during the French Revolution, when angry mobs ransacked royal tombs. But here's the twist: contemporary revolutionaries meticulously documented their pillaging, even melting down stolen reliquaries for bullion. Henry's urn appears on no seizure lists, suggesting it disappeared long before the revolutionaries arrived. Whether stolen for love, power, or some darker purpose, the missing heart remains one of history's most poignant enigmas, a void at the center of Catherine's story that echoes her own unhealed grief. And in that emptiness, we're left to wonder, if relics truly hold power, what might a queen as ruthless as Catherine have done with the physical essence of the man she both loved and lost? On a sweltering July night in 1578, the Marquis de Saint-Megrin staggered through the halls of the Louvre, clutching his throat as if wrestling an invisible hand. Just hours earlier, he'd been the picture of arrogance, a dashing courtier who'd openly mocked Catherine's astrologers and most recklessly bragged about acquiring a sacred relic stolen from a private chapel. Now his skin burned with unexplained welts, his breath came in ragged gasps, and his final words, scribbled frantically before his collapse, claimed the Queen had set the saints against him. By dawn, he was dead. Physicians declared it a fever, but Paris buzzed with a darker verdict. Saint-Megrin had been cursed. The relic at the heart of the scandal wasn't some grand treasure, but a humble silver thimble said to contain a thread from the Virgin Mary's veil. Catherine carried it constantly, believing it shielded her from assassination, a reasonable fear after surviving multiple poisoning attempts. When it vanished from her prayer desk, she reportedly turned pale and whispered to her ladies, "God will punish the thief." Saint-Megrin, already infamous for his sacrilegious jests, became the prime suspect after boasting at a banquet about plucking Medici superstitions like ripe fruit. What makes his death so unsettling are the inconsistencies. Witnesses described him convulsing in patterns that matched medieval accounts of divine punishment, yet his symptoms also aligned with known poisons like monkshood. Even stranger, the relic reappeared days later, placed neatly on Catherine's pillow, a detail omitted from official reports but noted in her maid's private journal. The timing raises eerie questions. Did Saint-Megrin truly steal it, or was he framed to reinforce Catherine's reputation for supernatural wrath? Perhaps the most chilling clue lies in the Marquis's own last letter, recently rediscovered in a Prague archive. In shaky script, he described dreaming of Catherine the night before his illness not as a queen, but as a shadowy figure weaving something into his gloves. Forensic analysis of his surviving effects found traces of a skin irritant derived from foxglove, a plant Catherine's gardeners cultivated extensively. Coincidence or proof that her curses were actually botanical warfare disguised as divine retribution? The St. Magrin affair became legend precisely because it blurred the line between myth and method. Whether through poison, psychological torment, or sheer macabre chance, Catherine ensured his fate served as a warning. Cross her, and even the heavens might conspire against you. In the end, the truth matters less than the effect. After his death, courtiers began crossing themselves when passing her chambers, and not a single relic went missing again. Beneath the glittering halls of the Louvre, where courtiers schemed under candlelight, Catherine de Medici commanded an invisible web of corridors that twisted like a second court beneath the first. Architectural historians have uncovered remnants of these clandestine passages, narrow staircases hidden behind tapestries, listening posts disguised as decorative alcoves, even a network of ventilation shafts repurposed into spy routes. Court diarist Pierre de L'Estoile recounted how nobles would abruptly halt conversations when certain wall sconces flickered, suspecting the queen's ear might be pressed against the hollow marble just inches away. One particularly chilling account describes how Catherine allegedly accessed a concealed balcony overlooking the Duc de Guise's private chambers. A servant's memoir notes the queen developed an uncanny habit of referencing conversations no witness could confirm she'd attended, down to mocking the Duke's off-key singing in his bath. Modern laser scans of the Louvre's walls reveal gaps consistent with peepholes drilled at precise angles, many aligned with seating areas where indiscretions were likeliest to spill. But the true genius of these passages lay in their psychological impact. By allowing snippets of their existence to leak, a scraping sound behind a panel, a veiled reference to walls that listen, Catherine cultivated paranoia more potent than any intercepted secret. Spanish ambassador Don Diego de Zúñiga wrote of being led through a seemingly ordinary doorway, only to emerge moments later in a completely different wing. His disorientation a not-so-subtle reminder that spatial logic bent to Medici whims. Recent restorations exposed the most tantalizing clue, a small silver bell unearthed beneath floorboards near Catherine's former bedchamber, its clapper removed to render it silent. Experts suspect it connected to a cord system enabling servants to alert her when passages were in use. The irony, these architectural feats may have backfired. As religious tensions escalated, Huguenot nobles spread rumors that the tunnels housed something darker than spies, perhaps even clandestine Catholic altars or torture chambers. In the end, Catherine's labyrinth became as much a liability as an asset, proof that even the most carefully constructed secrets can take on lives of their own. Among Catherine de Medici's most treasured possessions was an object that blurred the line between science and sorcery, a circular mirror framed in blackened silver, its surface reportedly capable of revealing glimpses of the future. Venetian diplomats described it as the glass that steals time, while Protestant pamphleteers decried it as a devil's eye. But this wasn't some Gothic prop. It was a cutting-edge optical device crafted by her court astrologer Cosimo Ruggeri, blending Renaissance glassmaking techniques with ancient scrying traditions. Contemporary accounts claim Catherine consulted it before every major decision, from arranging royal marriages to timing military campaigns. Yet the truth behind the mirror's power lies somewhere between physics and psychology. Ruggeri, a former student of the famed lens grinder Giambattista della Porta, likely exploited the mirror's concave shape to create subtle distortions. When candles were arranged at specific angles, the curved glass could project hazy images, perhaps even manipulated reflections of courtiers standing just outside the viewer's line of sight. Combine this with Catherine's known use of informants, and the visions take on a new light. A visiting English ambassador wrote of seeing his own face morph into a death's head in the glass, only to later discover Catherine had intercepted his letters, plotting with her enemies. Coincidence or a brilliantly staged intimidation tactic? The mirror's most infamous prophecy came in 1574, when Catherine allegedly saw her son Henry III lying lifeless in its depths, a vision that reportedly sent her into weeks of mourning years before his actual assassination. But here's what the legends omit. Court records show she intensified security around Henry immediately after this prophecy, suggesting the mirror may have reflected very human intelligence about brewing plots rather than supernatural foresight. What makes the mirror truly fascinating is its afterlife. After Catherine's death, it vanished, only to resurface in the possession of Cardinal Richelieu, another master of political theatre. X-rays of the frame he kept revealed hidden compartments, likely added later, containing coded notes and a vial of mercury, a substance alchemists believed could capture souls. Whether Catherine knew of these additions or whether history simply layered new myths onto her legacy, the mirror endures as a perfect metaphor for her reign, a surface that reflected not the future, but the fears and ambitions of those who dared to gaze into its depths. Catherine de Medici's jewel collection wasn't just a display of wealth, it was a weapon, a diplomatic tool, and ultimately a treasure lost to history's chaos. Among her most legendary pieces was the Black Pearl of Florence, a diamond-studded pendant said to darken in the presence of poison, and the Serpent's Eye, an emerald rumored to have been pried from an ancient idol. These weren't mere baubles, they were extensions of her power, gifted to sway allies or dangled as rewards for loyalty. Yet when revolutionaries stormed the Tuileries Palace in 1792, her meticulously catalogued gems vanished into the frenzy, scattered like fragments of a shattered rain. The sack of the royal treasury reads like something from a heist novel. Witness accounts describe soldiers stuffing pockets with loose stones, smashing lockets to pry out rubies, and even using diamond-encrusted swords to chop firewood in their haste. But the real mystery lies in what happened next. While some pieces resurfaced almost immediately, a tiara turned up in a Marseille brothel, a necklace was pawned by a drunken commissar, others simply disappeared. The Black Pearl was last seen clutched in the hand of a convent abbess who claimed Catherine's ghost had entrusted it to her for safekeeping. When the abbess died 3 days later, the pearl was gone. Modern treasure hunters have followed trails as faint as candle smoke. In 1923, a Parisian jeweler recognized Catherine's distinctive fleur-de-lis engraving on a diamond being sold by a Russian immigrant, only to have the stone vanish again during the paperwork. More recently, laser scans of a Chateau wall in the Loire Valley revealed hollow spaces matching the dimensions of Catherine's documented jewel caskets, but excavation yielded only a single pearl, its surface etched with microscopic symbols still undeciphered. The most promising lead emerged in 2018 when auction house specialists authenticated a strand of sapphires once owned by Catherine's granddaughter, a piece that had passed through 7 generations of a Dutch merchant family. Its provenance revealed a startling truth. Many looted jewels had actually been smuggled out years before the revolution by servants loyal to the Medici legacy. This raises an electrifying possibility. Could Catherine's most precious stones still lie hidden, waiting for someone to decode the clues she left behind? Perhaps the final irony is that the jewels' disappearance only magnified their legend. Like Catherine herself, they became ghosts, tangible yet elusive, their absence more powerful than their presence. Every auction house rumor, every attic discovery reignites the question: did revolutionaries truly steal her treasures, or did the Black Queen ensure they'd never be truly owned by anyone else? In the shadowy recesses of the Vatican archives lies a bundle of letters tied with faded crimson ribbon correspondence so explosive, it was deliberately misfiled among papal tax records for centuries. These are the so-called forbidden love letters, penned in Catherine de Medici's unmistakable looping script, addressed to none other than the Duc de Guise, her family's fiercest rival. The contents, partially obscured by time and deliberate ink stains, suggest a relationship far more intimate than politics alone could explain. One scorching passage from 1568 reads, "The moon remembers what we dared beneath its light," while another, more damning fragment insists, "Destroy this as you value our secret." Handwriting analysts remain bitterly divided. A 2021 forensic study commissioned by the Sorbonne compared these letters to Catherine's authenticated missives, noting consistent flourishes in the ES and GS. But skeptics point to subtle variations in the pressure strokes, differences that could indicate a cunning forgery meant to destabilize the Guise faction. The plot thickens when you consider the paper itself. Radiocarbon dating places it squarely in Catherine's era, yet the watermark matches a mill known to supply the Guise household, not the royal court. Was this a lover's exchange or an elaborate frame job? The Duc's own correspondence adds fuel to the fire. In a previously overlooked dispatch to his brother, he references the Italian woman's roses delivered with thorns concealed. Court gossip of the time whispered about Catherine sending bouquets where every third flower held a coded note. But the most compelling evidence comes from an unexpected source, Marguerite de Valois, Catherine's own daughter, who wrote in her memoirs of catching her mother weeping over a miniature of Guise swiftly hidden when noticed. What makes these letters truly incendiary isn't just the possibility of an affair, but the timing. They cluster in the months preceding the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, when Catherine and Guise stood shoulder to shoulder orchestrating the violence. Were these the exchanges of conspirators or clandestine lovers? Perhaps both. Renaissance politics knew no clear lines between the bedroom and the battlefield, a truth Catherine wielded as deftly as any dagger. The letter's survival against all odds forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about the Black Queen's heart. Behind every calculated move, there may have been a pulse of passion, or the perfect performance of its illusion. Catherine de Medici didn't just navigate the wars of religion. She orchestrated them like a grandmaster moving chess pieces in the dark. To understand her strategy, you have to see the battlefield through her eyes. France wasn't a kingdom to unite, but a scale to balance. Every concession to the Huguenots was calculated to provoke the Catholic hardliners. Every crackdown on Protestants designed to fuel their rebellion just enough to keep both sides dependent on her mediation. It wasn't peace she sought, it was perpetual tension, the kind that made her the indispensable pivot between factions. Take the Peace of Saint-Germain in 1570, which granted Huguenots unprecedented freedoms. On the surface, it looked like compromise, but Catherine's private letters reveal the cold calculus behind it. By allowing Protestant worship in certain cities, she handed the Catholic Guise faction a rallying cry, ensuring they'd remain militant and reliant on her to restrain them. When Catholic outrage boiled over, she'd step in as the moderating force, then quietly funnel arms to Huguenot leaders to keep the conflict simmering. This wasn't indecision, it was a deliberate feedback loop of violence and negotiation, each phase tightening her grip. The brilliance and brutality of her approach lay in its flexibility. She could play the devout Catholic when meeting with papal legates, then murmur sympathies to Protestant diplomats hours later. Her infamous flight to Joinville in 1562, where she seemingly fled Paris under Huguenot threat, was actually a masterstroke. By appearing vulnerable, she lured both factions into overplaying their hands, exposing their weaknesses for her to exploit. Spanish spies reported her chuckling over dispatches that described the chaos, scribbling notes about which noble houses were overextending their troops or depleting their treasuries. Yet the darkest evidence of her manipulation comes from the aftermath of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. While historians often paint it as a spontaneous eruption of violence, Catherine's ledger books tell a different story. Payments to printers skyrocketed in the weeks before, flooding Paris with anti-Huguenot pamphlets to stoke tensions. Then, in the massacre's wake, she disbursed rewards to Catholic mob leaders while simultaneously funding Huguenot exiles' escape, a contradiction that only makes sense if you realize she wasn't picking sides but pruning both. What's often overlooked is how she weaponized marriage alliances to sustain the conflict. By wedding her daughter Marguerite to the Protestant Henry of Navarre, she didn't just broker peace, she created a hostage situation. The match gave her leverage over Huguenot leadership while inflaming Catholic suspicions, ensuring neither side could fully trust the other. Even the wedding itself became a trap, with its lavish celebrations masking the surveillance of Protestant guests whose whispered conversations were meticulously recorded by her infamous flying squadron. The ultimate testament to her strategy's success, the wars dragged on for decades, outlasting her because she'd engineered a system where victory for either side meant collapse for the monarchy. Her sons inherited not a unified France, but a carefully calibrated stalemate that forced them to rely on the same Machiavellian playbook. In the end, Catherine's legacy wasn't peace or piety. It was the art of controlled chaos, a lesson that power thrives not in resolution, but in the space between opposing forces. Hidden in the vaults of Fontainebleau Palace for nearly a century, Jean Clout's portrait of Catherine de Medici was said to be so unnervingly lifelike that servants refused to dust its frame alone. Unlike the flattering official images that showed her as a serene Renaissance queen, this painting reportedly captured something far more revealing: the sharp angles of her face in unguarded moments, the calculating stillness behind her eyes, even a faint smirk playing at the corners of her lips. Then, in 1635, it vanished without record, sparking whispers that someone had scrubbed its secrets from history. The mystery deepens when you trace its provenance. Clout, Henry II's court painter, specialized in unvarnished realism. His sketches of courtiers often included their moles, scars, and double chins with near-clinical detachment. His portrait of Catherine wasn't commissioned for display, but as a private study for the Royal Archives, which explains its startling candor. A surviving inventory from 1589 lists it as the Italian woman's face unrestored, suggesting even then it was considered too politically volatile for public view. What makes its disappearance so suspicious is the timing. The portrait was last documented in the possession of Cardinal Richelieu, Louis XIII's ruthless chief minister, who famously purged artworks he deemed injurious to the state's dignity. Yet Richelieu's meticulous catalogues omit any mention of its destruction, only a cryptic marginal note about a certain Florentine visage remanded to the fire by higher authority. Some historians speculate Louis himself ordered its burning, fearing Catherine's unflattering likeness might weaken the mystique of monarchy, but conspiracy theories abound. One persistent legend claims the painting wasn't destroyed, but altered, that overpainting transformed Catherine's features into those of her granddaughter Marie de Medici, whose official portraits bear an uncanny similarity in composition. Infrared scans of Marie's portraits conducted in 2017 revealed ghostly brushstrokes beneath the surface, though conservators remain divided on whether they represent Catherine's original image or simply reused canvas. The most tantalizing clue surfaced in 1984, when an auction catalogue from 1792 resurfaced in a Marseille attic. Listed between a set of Sevres porcelain and a gilded clock was "A Lady of the Old Court," attributed to Clout, sold to an unnamed buyer. The description matches the lost portrait's dimensions exactly, noting the sitter's black hood and hands clasped like a butcher's prayer, a detail consistent with Catherine's notorious grip on power. If genuine, the trail likely ends with the revolutionaries who dispersed royal collections, but archivists still scour private collections, hoping to find the canvas that dared to show the Black Queen as she truly was. Perhaps the portrait's true power lay not in its accuracy, but in what it represented. In an era where rulers controlled their images as carefully as their armies, an unmediated glimpse behind the mask was more dangerous than any poison. Whether ashes or hiding in plain sight, Clowart's masterpiece remains Catherine's final enigma, a reminder that even she couldn't fully dictate how history would see her. The basilisk brooch glinted ominously on Catherine de Medici's bodice, its golden serpent coiled in an eternal strike, emerald eyes catching the light like a predator lying in wait. This wasn't just another jewel, it was a loaded symbol, a fusion of Medici heraldry and whispered court terror. The basilisk, a creature of myth capable of killing with a single glance, had long been a Medici emblem, but Catherine transformed it from family pride into something far more unsettling. Contemporary chroniclers noted she wore it almost exclusively during tense negotiations, the brooch's position strategically placed near her collarbone, forcing diplomats to either meet its gaze or risk seeming cowardly by avoiding it. Delve deeper, and the brooch design reveals layers of cunning. The serpent's hinged fangs could ostensibly hold perfume, a common Renaissance practice, but palace gossip insisted they concealed something far deadlier. A visiting German baron's memoir recounts Catherine offering him a rose pinned with the brooch, only for him to develop a rash hours later. Was it an allergic reaction or proof of the venomous legend? The truth may lie in the brooch's mechanics. X-rays of a similar Medici serpent piece revealed hollow channels within the metalwork, consistent with toxin storage, though no residue was ever proven. Yet the real power of the basilisk lay in its psychological theater. In an era where jewelry spoke as loudly as words, Catherine's choice of creature was telling. Unlike the docile doves or pious crosses favored by other queens, her emblem was a literal monster, one that could petrify even dragons. Protestant pamphlets seized on this imagery, depicting her as the biblical serpent in Eden, offering poisoned apples of Catholic deceit. She didn't refute the comparisons, she leaned into them. During the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, witnesses reported the brooch missing from her attire only for it to reappear days later, polished to a sinister gleam. The brooch's fate is as enigmatic as its wearer. Inventories from her estate list it as disposed of by order of the crown after her death, but a nearly identical piece surfaced in the collection of Elizabeth Tudor, Catherine's rival. Was it a trophy, a warning, or a final act of psychological warfare? Today, the original remains lost, but its legacy lingers, a testament to how Catherine weaponized every detail, down to the jewels on her chest, proving that in the game of power, even accessories could draw blood. The candles burned low in the Hall of Mirrors on that fateful night in 1577, casting flickering shadows across a feast that would become legend. Officially, the banquet celebrated the marriage of Catherine's favorite courtier, but the guest list told another story. Seated between toasts of honeyed wine and platters of gilded peacock, three of Catherine's most vocal critics fidgeted under the weight of her gaze: the Duc de Montmorency, whose troops had recently slaughtered her Italian guards, the Protestant firebrand Philippe Duplessis Mornay, and Cardinal Bourbon, who'd openly called her a foreign poisoner in sermon. The surviving menu, preserved in a private collector's archive, reads like a culinary trap, every dish laced with ingredients that could mask bitterness or trigger hidden allergies. Start with the opening course, artichoke hearts stuffed with spiced crab, a dish Catherine's Florentine chefs had perfected. Montmorency, known to despise shellfish, was seen reluctantly nibbling the edges after the Queen fixed him with a pointed stare. Next came the main spectacle, a roasted boar basted in cherry sauce, its sweetness undercut by a mysterious Italian herb blend, noted in the kitchen logs as containing rue, a plant notorious for causing violent stomach cramps when mixed with alcohol. Duplessis Mornay's later account claims his wine turned strangely metallic after the third course, though he blamed heretics' nerves at the time. But the true smoking gun emerged decades later in the diary of a scullery maid. She described Pantanelli, Catherine's head chef, personally supervising the preparation of individual tarts for the cardinal's table, pastries shaped like communion wafers, their crusts brushed with almond oil. Bourbon, who'd bragged of his iron constitution, spent the next fortnight bedridden with a flux of the bowels, conveniently missing a crucial vote on church reforms. The maid's chilling addendum: the leftover tarts were fed to stray dogs which reportedly yelped and expired ere matins. Yet for all the circumstantial evidence, modern historians spot glaring inconsistencies. The same kitchen records show Catherine's own taster sampled every dish, hardly the act of a queen planning murder, and Duplessis Mornay's metallic wine. Spectral analysis of goblets from that era reveals high lead content in green glazed vessels, a common cause of Renaissance poisoning symptoms. The banquet's infamy may owe less to actual toxins and more to Catherine's mastery of psychological warfare. By serving suspect foods to enemies while her allies dined freely, she didn't need to kill only to terrify. The ultimate twist lies in the guest accounts themselves. Comparing them reveals a pattern. The louder a noble later denounced the banquet, the milder their symptoms had actually been. Montmorency, who bellowed about assassination attempts for years, never mentioned illness in his immediate letters. The lesson was clear. In Catherine's France, the rumor of poison could cripple a rival as surely as the real thing, and no one spun rumors like the woman who turned dining into a blood sport. Perhaps the banquet's most enduring legacy isn't in who died, but in who learned. Within months, half the nobility had hired Italian chefs, not for their recipes, but for their knowledge of antidotes. Catherine, ever the strategist, even sold them her personal stock of Venetian glassware, purported to shatter upon contact with poison. Whether any of it worked mattered less than the message. At her table, survival was a privilege, not a right. And that, more than any toxin, was the real poison coursing through the veins of the French court. When workers pried open Catherine de Medici's tomb in 1789, they expected dust and bones, not the near-perfect preservation that greeted them. The queen, who'd been dead for over 2 centuries, lay eerily intact, her skin leathery but unrotted, her infamous black gown still clinging to her frame as if she might sit up at any moment. The stonemason who first glimpsed her reportedly crossed himself so violently he bruised his chest, while a nearby monk collapsed, screaming she'd been cursed by God to never decay. Word spread like wildfire through revolutionary Paris. The Black Queen had cheated death itself. Scientific analysis today offers rational explanations: the lead-lined coffin, the cool crypt environment, even the embalming techniques she'd imported from Italy, all contributed to her preservation. But in the superstitious chaos of post-revolution France, reason took a backseat to terror. Pamphlets circulated describing Catherine's corpse with lips still red as blood and fingernails grown into claws, classic vampire tropes that shocked a populace already reeling from political upheaval. The myth-making reached its peak when a radical journalist claimed her eyes flew open during the exhumation, a physical impossibility given the desiccation, yet one that cemented her posthumous reputation as something other. The real controversy emerged when physicians examined the body. Their notes, rediscovered in a Bordeaux archive in 1912, describe unnatural substances permeating her tissues, residues later identified as myrrh, mercury, and crushed malachite, ingredients Renaissance alchemists believed could halt corruption. Had Catherine's embalmers been following scientific protocols or dabbling in occult preservation rites? The mercury alone suggests both. It was commonly used in embalming but also featured in immortality elixirs of the era. Most telling is what happened next. While other royals' remains were tossed into mass graves, Catherine's body vanished for days before being quietly reburied. Revolutionary records show an unexplained payment to an Italian chemist during this gap, fueling speculation that someone, perhaps a Medici loyalist, stole her for further study. The ultimate irony: this woman who spent her life battling her reputation as a monstrous foreigner became, in death, the literal monster her enemies had always painted her to be. Yet the preservation she so feared might have pleased her in one way. It ensured her physical presence lingered long after her power faded, a final defiance carved not in stone but in flesh. The Constable of France, Anne de Montmorency, represented everything Catherine de Medici despised: old blood nobility, unchecked military power, and most dangerously, open contempt for her foreign roots. Their feud wasn't just political, it was personal, a decades-long chess match where every move dripped with venom. Montmorency, a grizzled veteran who'd served 3 kings before Catherine's rise, famously dismissed her as the Italian shopkeeper's daughter at court, a slight she never forgot. But their rivalry took a darker turn after the Battle of St. Denis in 1567, where Montmorency's forces slaughtered Catherine's elite Italian Guard, a unit she'd personally recruited from Florence. Witnesses reported her collapsing when the news reached her, not from grief, but from a cold fury that would shape her next decade of revenge. What followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Catherine couldn't openly destroy France's most celebrated soldier, so she employed subtler weapons. First came the rumors, spread by her network of spies and fortune-tellers, whispers that Montmorency's battle wounds had left him unclean, his blood corrupted. Then came the staged omens, a court astrologer's public prediction that a great hawk would fall paralyzed from the sky, coincided suspiciously with the constable's sudden bout of gout before a key military review. But the most chilling tactic emerged in Montmorency's own household. His cook's later confession revealed that Catherine's agents had paid him to slip dried monkshood, a nerve toxin, into the constable's gloves, knowing he'd lick his fingers while eating. The doses were tiny, just enough to cause trembling hands and slurred speech, undermining his authority without leaving evidence. Montmorency retaliated the only way a medieval warlord knew how, by doubling down on brute force. He ordered the execution of captured Italian mercenaries, displaying their bodies with placards mocking Catherine's heritage. Her response: she gifted him an exquisitely carved box of Venetian sweetmeats delivered by a known poisoner's apprentice. The constable never touched them, but the message was clear. Even his allies began crossing themselves when passing her chambers, fearing her reach. The final act played out at the siege of St. Denis in 1575. Montmorency, now in his 70s, led a reckless cavalry charge against Protestant forces, a move so uncharacteristically rash that his own officers questioned his judgment. Contemporary chroniclers noted the Queen's unusual calm upon hearing of his fatal wound, even as she publicly mourned. But the true revelation came decades later, when a Huguenot prisoner's diary surfaced, describing a mysterious woman bribing Protestant scouts with gold and a lock of dark hair allegedly Catherine's, to let the old wolf run where he shouldn't. Whether she manipulated the battle or simply exploited its chaos remains debated, but the outcome served her perfectly. France's last great feudal lord died screaming for a priest, while the Italian shopkeeper's daughter outlived him by 14 years, her grip on power tighter than ever. The Montmorency vendetta exposes Catherine's signature blend of patience and ruthlessness. Where others saw an immovable obstacle, she saw pressure points: physical, psychological, even supernatural. By the time the constable realized he wasn't fighting a queen but a force of nature, it was already too late. His downfall became her legend, proof that in Renaissance France, even the mightiest sword could be undone by a whisper or a well-timed tremor in the hand. Among the most tantalizing gaps in Catherine de Medici's historical record is a book that may never be found: the so-called Crimson Diary, a personal journal repeatedly referenced by contemporaries but conspicuously absent from every archive. The first mention surfaces in a 1583 letter from her librarian, noting the Queen had commissioned a ledger bound in dyed leather, its pages reserved for matters too delicate for clerks. For decades afterward, ambassadors and courtiers alluded to its contents with a mix of dread and fascination. The Spanish envoy Don Bernardino de Mendoza wrote of being shown a volume where Her Majesty records dreams and reckonings, while Catherine's own lady-in-waiting, Madame de Dampierre, described catching her mistress writing by candlelight, swiftly shutting the book when noticed its cover leaving a faint rust-colored stain on her fingertips. What makes the diary's disappearance so suspicious is the pattern of its references. Every account peaks during Catherine's most controversial moments, the weeks preceding the scent. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, the sudden downfall of the Duc de Guise, even her final days when she reportedly refused communion unless a priest retrieved the Crimson Book from her chambers. A Vatican spy's report from 1589 claims the diary contained numbered lists beside sketches of courtiers, some marked with astrological symbols, others with tiny droplets of wax that may have sealed their fates. The hunt for physical evidence takes stranger turns. In 1721, a Parisian bookbinder's inventory listed a stained Florentine daybook purchased by an anonymous nobleman, but the trail goes cold after a fire destroyed the buyer's estate. More compelling is the 1945 discovery of a hidden compartment in Chenonceau's library containing a single vellum sheet with Catherine's handwriting. Today I dreamed of 3 crowns shattered at my feet and knew it to be truth, not prophecy. The page edges bore the same reddish tint described centuries earlier. Scholars remain divided. Some argue the diary was deliberately destroyed, perhaps by her son Henry III, who purged records of her occult dealings after her death. Others believe it survives, its explosive revelations too dangerous for any archive to admit holding. The most chilling theory that Catherine herself arranged its disappearance, ensuring her most private thoughts would become one final enigma, as carefully curated in absence as her public image was in life. What we're left with isn't just a missing book, but a void that magnifies every mystery surrounding her. The Crimson Diary may hold the key to understanding whether her darkest acts were calculated strategy or the unraveling of a woman pushed to extremes. Until it surfaces, if it ever does, its absence lingers like a phantom limb, reminding us that history's most compelling secrets aren't always in what's preserved, but in what's been meticulously erased. Even centuries after her death, the halls of the Château de Saint-Germain seem to hold their breath when night falls, especially near the tower where Catherine de Medici's private chambers once stood. Guards stationed there have reported the same unnerving phenomenon for generations, an icy draft slithering down the staircase when no window is open, carrying the faint scent of Florentine iris perfume. The most infamous incident occurred in 1789, when a revolutionary soldier cataloging royal properties swore he saw a pale hand beckoning from a walled-up doorway, only to find the space behind it solid brick. But the ghost stories take a darker turn when you trace their origins. These aren't random hauntings, they're spectral echoes of Catherine's most unresolved vendettas. Take the notorious Black Veil apparition, first documented by a chambermaid in 1632. She described encountering a weeping woman in a tattered mourning gown near the old council room, the same room where the Duc de Guise's murder was plotted. The maid's account, buried in palace ledgers for centuries, specifies the ghost clutched a dagger with a serpent-shaped hilt, its blade dripping with invisible blood. What makes this chilling isn't just the detail, but the timing. The sighting coincided exactly with the 50th anniversary of Guise's assassination, suggesting Catherine's spirit relives her greatest triumphs or regrets. Then there's the matter of the children. Multiple witnesses, from a 19th century archivist to a World War II officer billeted in the Château, claim to have heard faint laughter and running footsteps in the abandoned nursery wing. This wouldn't be remarkable except for one unsettling consistency. The laughter always stops abruptly, followed by a woman's agonized scream. Historical records confirm this was the very wing where Catherine's youngest children, Jean and Louis, died of plague in 1566. Even in death, it seems, she can't escape the grief that shaped her most ruthless decisions. The most compelling evidence lies in the palace's architectural quirks. Restoration work in 2012 uncovered a series of scratches inside a sealed-off passage, not random marks, but deliberate etchings resembling astrological symbols Catherine used in her cipher letters. Carbon dating placed them in the late 16th century, but here's what froze the researchers' blood. The scratches showed signs of being made over decades, as if someone had been trapped there, adding to them year after year. The corridor leads nowhere. Perhaps the most telling detail comes from the living. Palace tour guides note that visitors often feel inexplicably watched near Catherine's former chambers, but Protestant tourists report the sensation far more intensely. One Lutheran pastor's diary from 1824 describes being overcome with nausea in the gallery, his crucifix burning against his chest until he fled, a reaction eerily mirroring accounts of Huguenot nobles who believed Catherine cursed them. Coincidence or proof that some grudges transcend even death? Yet amid the terror, there's a tragic undercurrent. Several witnesses describe the ghost not as malevolent but restless, a figure endlessly rearranging invisible papers on phantom desks or kneeling as if pleading before portraits of her dead sons. The real horror may not be Catherine's vengeance from beyond, but her inability to let go of the power she wielded so fiercely in life. After all, what is a ghost if not a soul trapped by unfinished business? And for the Black Queen, business was always deadly. Deep in the vaults of the Louvre, where candlelight flickered against crucibles and the air smelled of sulfur and desperation, Catherine de Medici bankrolled a gamble that would haunt France for decades. The year was 1566, and the kingdom's treasury bled gold from relentless wars and court extravagance. Rather than tighten belts, Catherine turned to men who claimed they could spin straw into riches, alchemists promising to transmute base metals into bullion. It began subtly with discreet payments to a Bolognese adept named Bragadin, whose laboratory near the Pont Neuf produced vials of shimmering powder he called the essence of solar metal. Witnesses described Catherine inspecting his work with the intensity of a general surveying troops, her fingers tracing the rim of a crucible as if it held salvation itself. But the dream unraveled faster than the guilds could mint counterfeit coins. Bragadin's gold proved to be little more than gilded brass, his elaborate demonstrations relying on sleight of hand and mercury alloys that dissolved under scrutiny. Undeterred, Catherine doubled down, funding an entire colony of alchemists in the Marais district, and this was where the scheme turned sinister. Led by the charismatic but ruthless Marco Antonio, these self-styled philosophers of fire began demanding exorbitant sums for materials like ground rubies and dragon's blood resin, items they claimed were essential to their work. Court records reveal shipments of precious gems vanishing into their furnaces, while the royal coffers grew lighter by the month. The true cost, however, wasn't just financial. As the alchemists' failures mounted, so did their desperation. Antonio's group began experimenting with toxic mercury vapors, poisoning an entire street when a retort exploded. Then came the darker whispers that some alchemists had pivoted from creating gold to crafting poisons, offering their services to nobles eager to settle scores. Suddenly, Catherine found herself funding not just charlatans but potential assassins. A surviving ledger from 1571 shows her ordering the arrest of 3 alchemists for treasonous deceit, yet curiously, their names reappear months later receiving new grants. Had she truly believed in their promises, or was she trapped, unable to admit the scheme's collapse without inviting financial catastrophe? The final twist lay in the paper trail. While most historians focus on the alchemist's fraud, Catherine's personal correspondence reveals a startling pragmatism beneath the mysticism. Letters to her bankers in Florence discuss using the alchemical projects as cover for covert operations, overpaying for quicksilver and vitriol to disguise payments to Italian mercenaries and informants. Even the infamous mercury experiments may have had a military purpose. Venetian spies reported French agents testing the vapors as a potential battlefield weapon. When the last furnace cooled in 1579, the kingdom's debt had ballooned to over 2 million livres, a sum that would cripple her son's reigns. Yet in typical Medici fashion, Catherine spun even this disaster to her advantage. By publicly blaming the alchemists for France's woes, she diverted anger from her own policies. The same courtiers who'd clamored for gold now recoiled at the mention of alchemy, leaving her free to impose brutal new taxes, lest the realm fall prey to further sorcery. What began as a quest for boundless wealth ended as a cautionary tale about power's alchemy, how the illusion of control could be as intoxicating as any elixir. And though the laboratories were shuttered, their legacy lingered in the scorch marks on the Louvre stones and the hollow clink of empty purses across France. The gold was never real, but the consequences, those turned out to be the purest, heaviest thing of all. The candles guttered in Catherine de Medici's death chamber as winter winds rattled the shutters of Blois in January 1589. Wrapped in the black velvet that had become her second skin, the queen who'd spent a lifetime deciphering the future now faced her own, and what she claimed to see would send shivers through the court for generations. According to her confessor, Father Julian, Catherine's final hours were marked not by prayers, but by a series of increasingly precise visions. She described her 3 sons, Francis, Charles, and Henry, standing before her as they'd been in youth, their royal robes disintegrating into shrouds before her eyes. Most chillingly, she reportedly whispered that the Valois line would end as it began, with 3 crowns broken like dry twigs. Within months, history would render its verdict. This deathbed prophecy carried eerie echoes of Nostradamus' earlier warnings. Decades prior, the seer had written of young lions who would fall before the stronger, a quatrain long interpreted as foreseeing the premature deaths of Catherine's sons. But the Queen's final vision added a grim specificity. Where Nostradamus spoke in riddles, Catherine's dying words allegedly named names predicting her last surviving son, Henry III, would perish by steel before the year's end. The accuracy was terrifying. That August, a fanatical monk stabbed Henry to death, extinguishing the Valois dynasty just as she'd foreseen. Yet historians spot troubling inconsistencies in the accounts. Father Julian's original notes, rediscovered in a Vatican archive in 1912, contain no mention of these prophecies. The famous 3 crowns line first appears in a sensationalized memoir published 20 years after Catherine's death, written by a former courtier seeking Huguenot sympathies. Even the timing raises doubts. Henry's assassination occurred during escalating political violence, making his murder tragically predictable rather than prescient. Was Catherine's vision genuine foresight, or did later chroniclers reshape her ramblings to fit known events? The answer may lie in her lifelong obsession with control. Letters from her final months reveal frantic attempts to secure Henry's succession, suggesting she recognized his vulnerability. Her alleged prophecy mirrored Nostradamus' words not because she'd glimpsed the future, but because she'd internalized his warnings as self-fulfilling truth. Every decision, from pushing Henry toward increasingly brutal policies to isolating potential rivals, steered events toward the catastrophe she most feared. In this light, her deathbed vision becomes less a prediction and more a final, tragic admission. After decades of trying to outmaneuver fate, she'd become its architect. The ultimate irony, Catherine's dying words unwittingly guaranteed her enduring mystique. By seeming to foresee the Valois downfall, she cemented her legend as the queen who'd peered too deeply into time's abyss and found her own reflection staring back. Whether divine insight or desperate delusion, that final prophecy became the perfect capstone to a life spent dancing between the seen and unseen, where every shadow held meaning and every whisper might rewrite history. 25 fragments of a life shrouded in shadow, each one a puzzle piece in the portrait of Catherine de Medici, a woman who defies simple categorization. From poison plots whispered in palace corridors to the silent power of her black mourning gowns, From the coded letters that shaped empires to the ghostly prophecies that may have sealed her family's fate, every detail we've uncovered reveals a ruler who mastered the art of survival in an age where power was as fragile as glass. Her story isn't just hers, it's a reflection of Renaissance Europe itself, a world teetering between brutality and beauty, faith and fury, where a single misstep could mean ruin. Consider the contradictions: the queen who funded alchemists' futile quests for gold yet balanced kingdoms on the edge of financial collapse, the mother who grieved lost children while orchestrating massacres, the patron of arts who surrounded herself with astrologers and spies. Was she a tyrant cloaked in velvet, or a strategist forced to play a game with no rules? The answer lies in the eye of the beholder. To her enemies, she was the Black Queen, a foreign serpent strangling France with Italian deceit. To her allies, she was the unwavering hand that kept the realm from splintering into chaos. Now, as the final piece slots into place, the question lingers: was Catherine de Medici a villainess or a visionary? Did she poison her way to power, or was she poisoned by the very legends crafted to destroy her? The truth, like the woman herself, refuses to be pinned down. Perhaps that's her greatest legacy, not the throne she held, but the enigma she became. So, what do you think? History has given us the facts, but the judgment? That's yours to decide. Drop your verdict in the comments. Was Catherine the architect of her era's darkness, or the only one who could navigate it? The debate begins